I see why the Bruins want to do it with Poitras. Listen, you got a 9-game sample size here. You want to see if this guy can. He's already shown that he can, I think, handle himself in the NHL ranks. He can fight through the physicality, can still make plays, is smart with the puck, but can he unlock more tangible offense? And I think you'll see if he can do that next to a guy like Marchand in these next couple of games.
Poke the Bear is brought to you by Fanduel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network.
And welcome into Poke the Bear, episode 170. I'm your host, Conor Ryan, presented by our good friends over at Fanduel. And as you can see, riding solo today. We've got no Evan, no Ty, anyone else like that. And honestly, makes a lot of sense. We're as excited, I think, as Bruins fans are for the new season to get underway. We're in a bit of a lull. It's not great. It's not great when you've been waiting a few months for Bruins hockey to get back, and all of a sudden the Bruins go out on the West Coast and they're playing, one game in 5 days. It's not great. Not a lot to talk about right now. We looked, Evan and I spoke about Jim Montgomery's lineup reshuffle on Monday during our taping of Bruins Beat. But since then, Bruins have an off day as we're recording this on Tuesday. Not a whole lot to talk about right now. Not a lot of new developments, I would say, beyond what we've seen over these last 2 games against Chicago and Nashville. And even then, can you glean all that much? I mean, listen, Bruins are 2-0. A lot of guys have impressed right now, but really don't have a huge sample size quite yet. Especially, you look at that Nashville game, how many total minutes of 5-on-5 play even were there in that game? Not a whole lot. Not in a game where Bruins are killing 7 penalties. So we still don't have a full, I think, sample size quite yet of this team. But as we kind of wait for more tape to be out there, more games to happen, the Bruins finally head out to the West Coast for what ideally should be a pretty light schedule for them in terms of, listen, this is a team that is kind of starting a new chapter in the franchise's history. So good to get them out there against teams like Anaheim, even they go out to play Chicago, the San Jose Sharks. Not good. So if you're the Bruins, even though I'm sure both them and obviously you guys would like them to be playing a lot more games early on here, the matchups that they do have are pretty favorable to them as they kind of figure out where best to put guys. So again, for this episode where it's a solo show, not a lot happening with the Bruins right now, at least in terms of tangible news. We figured might as well start it off with our first mailbag podcast of the new season. So I took to Twitter on Monday, asked for a few user submitted questions. Again, thank you guys for sending in stuff. If you have any other questions throughout the year that we can kind of stow away in our mailbags, I'm sure we'll have plenty of these throughout the year. Please send them along to either myself, Evan. We'll definitely pocket them and use them at a later time. But let's dive into it. We have, I think, about 6 questions here. So we'll kind of hit on some of the top topics here and see kind of what you guys are thinking about the state of this Bruins team just 2 games in. So first question is from @Colin_the_Master1. And Colin asks, what's your opinion on how JVR has played so far? And what more would you like to see from him? Well, Colin, thanks for the question. And I think that game against Nashville was probably the perfect microcosm of what you hope to see from JVR, right? And again, Evan and I discussed this. I don't think JVR is the same player he was, back when he was with the Flyers in that first stint or with the Maple Leafs especially. I don't think he's a guy that's giving you 30 goals. That being said, you see his skill set and what he brings. And it's not like this is a guy that is reinventing the wheel in terms of why he's been so productive in the NHL, why he's had such a long NHL career. He's a big body, obviously, at the net front, but his skill at, in power play situations down low, whether it's the hand-eye coordination, the quick passes along the crease, his ability to tip pucks. Charlie McAvoy pretty much said that, Joe Pavelski is the guy that kind of around the league has the most praise for the ability to tip pucks and redirect pucks and generate chances that way. JVR is kind of right behind Pavelski in that regard. He's been doing it for a long, long time. And if you're the Bruins, again, listen, you would love if JVR finds the fountain of youth and gives you a 2020 season. That would be fantastic. I think if he can establish himself as a go-to guy on the net front there on the power play, gives you an added element there. Because again, you're kind of reworking key pieces of your power play. Without Bergeron there, you have Zacha in the bumper, which adds a different wrinkle, but there's going to be some learning, bumps along the way there. If you can have a guy like JVR who can kind of make something out of nothing with any point shot that heads his way, or can make things happen with some of those, passes in the crease that can lead to a lot of high danger chances, it just makes an already pretty talented power play that much deadlier. So I think at 5-on-5, we'll see where he's best utilized. I think Montgomery's latest lineup shuffle with putting JVR with Coyle and Frederick, I think better suits all those guys, especially if it's going to be more of a puck possession plotting line out there that is just going to be a pain in the ass to play against. I mean, all three of those guys, Coyle, Frederick, JVR, are 6'3", all over 200 pounds, all very tough to knock off the puck when they have it on their stick. So I like JVR in that spot at 5-on-5 play, but I think especially on the power play, this is a guy that is, averaged about 8 or 9 power play goals per season. Last year was a major dip for him. He only had 2. But that being said, I'll chalk that up more of it being an outlier than an indictment on his skills really kind of dropping off. Granted, he was on a Philadelphia power play that was downright dreadful. They were last in the league, 15%, I think 15.4. And again, that power play unit didn't have guys like Pastrnak or Marchand feeding him the puck, right? You had Joel Farabee, Provorov at some point, right? Like, just not guys that I think are proven offensive conduits, especially in terms of getting the puck down low to a guy like JVR. Having McAvoy at the point and Pastrnak and Marchand and these guys will be able to put, I think, JVR in a better spot to showcase his skills that really haven't eroded in terms of how good he is at the net front. So that's my expectation for JVR. If he can give you 15 goals, chip in with 6 or 7 on the power play, he's already made a pretty good dent in that with this game against Nashville on Saturday. So again, for what he brings, his added element on the power play, and most importantly, the fact that he is signed to a 1-year deal for $1 million, I think that's a pretty good value for the Bruins, and he's already kind of showcased that through 2 games with his new team. So, all right, the next question we have is from Mr. Antisocialite, who asks, how do you think Coyle will react if Poitras displaces him in the top 6? Should Poitras be giving a game or 2 at 2C? Thank you for the question. Obviously, I think we're going to see that probably starting as soon as Thursday when the Bruins head out on the West Coast, that Poitras is pretty much going to get a look in the top 6 based on the lines we saw on Monday at Warrior Ice Arena. It looks like it's going to be JVR, Zacha, or not JVR, Jake DeBrusk, Zacha, and Pastrnak as kind of your high-octane offensive line, right? DeBrusk back at his natural spot at left wing adds more pace to that grouping. I imagine they're going to get a lot of ozone starts. You have Brad Marchand with Matt Poitras and Morgan Geekie, which is an added wrinkle there. But again, this is a group that Montgomery hopes can unlock a little bit more 5-on-5 offense. If you're the Bruins and you're high on Poitras and what he can bring as a poised playmaker, putting him with an elite talent like Marchand certainly helps in that regard. And Montgomery pretty much said that Poitras earned that opportunity. If he had zeros on the board in these last 2 games and wasn't really impacting the game, was getting knocked off the puck, they probably wouldn't have bumped him up to this spot. But he's proven that he deserves a look there. And with Poitras moving up, you have a third line, as we've mentioned before, that's has a lot of heft to it. And JVR, Coyle, and Frederick as more of your puck possession, maybe more of your defense focused line, right? If that's the line, and Coyle and Frederick have done a lot of shutdown roles, especially last year. They were kind of your de facto shutdown forward grouping. If they can keep that up this year, and all of a sudden you open the door for the Zacha line and even the Poitras line to get more ozone starts, that helps out everyone, I think, in terms of unlocking more offense. So, again, I see why the Bruins want to do it with Poitras. Listen, you got a 9-game sample size here. You want to see if this guy can – he's already shown that he can, I think, handle himself in the NHL ranks. He can fight through the physicality, can still make plays, is smart with the puck. But can he unlock more tangible offense? And I think you'll see if he can do that next to a guy like Marchand in these next couple of games. But for Coyle, yeah, I mean, it is something that he's mentioned all year, that, he's taking it as a big responsibility to play in the top 6. But at the end of the day, it has to come down to where guys are, 1, best suited, and 2, what best helps the team out there, right? Like, this is a situation with Coyle where Listen, I think anyone would want top 6 minutes, guaranteed, right? And Coyle, again, has been a very good player for this team for a long time, probably more suited in that 3C spot. And maybe that's where he's best suited in terms of not only where his skill set can be best utilized, especially if he's with a couple of other puck possession guys like a Frederick and a JVR, but if him in that role and his ability to possess the puck, eat up the clock, really negate other teams' top forwards in more of a defensive oriented role. Again, that's not flashy. That's not nearly as appealing as proven top 6 minutes, getting a guy like Marchand on your line. But if that is better catered towards where Coyle's skill set is and helps the team, I think you have to that I think at the end of the day it comes down to what's best for the team, right? I mean, look at Taylor Hall, who right now is back on the top line in Chicago with Connor Bedard, right? Like, would that guy who is still only a few years removed from winning the Hart Trophy as league MVP, would he like to be a top 6 fixture with the Bruins? Of course, but he was more of a third line defensive focus guy last year with Coyle and Frederick. And again, that may not be what exactly he wants to do, but if you're part of a group that was rewriting the record books and was giving you a chance to win a Stanley Cup, I think you do that. And again, it remains to be seen if this team has those same Stanley Cup aspirations. But if Coyle in that spot at 3C can play to his strengths, really lock down another team's top forwards, and it opens the door for guys like Zacha and Poitras to thrive. And that's not to say that Coyle, if he's back at 3C, is all of a sudden going to be now limited to 20 points, what have you. Like Coyle, I think you can still pencil him in for 35, 45 points, wherever you put him in a lineup, just kind of the way he plays. But I think it all ultimately comes down to just where he's best utilized and what best helps of the team. And I think if Poitras can prove that he can hold his own in top 6, I think that domino effect of, pushing a guy like Coyle further down the lineup, making that into more of a defensive focused third line helps out the entire team. And all of a sudden a forward grouping that had a whole lot of question marks going into the year. And again, you can't replace the guys they've lost, but you can see the plans kind of starting to fall into place a little bit more once you have Coyle in that spot and Poitras in a top 6 part driving play along with a guy like Zacha. So we'll make for a very interesting road trip to be sure. You guys are gonna have to stay up a little bit late for those West Coast games, but I think it'll be fascinating to see just how Poitras does, but how the rest of a really reworked lineup holds its own in that game. So before we go into our next set of questions, let's take a quick pause here and hear from our good friends over at Fanduel.
Snap into action this NFL season with Fanduel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. Now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use, and you can bet on everything, from spreads to player props and more. And frankly, that's the best part about FanDuel, is that you can bet on anything. You want to bet on how many touchdowns Mac Jones is going to throw this year? Be my guest. Maybe how many wins the Bruins are going to have in 2023-24. Go for it. You can really do it all. So bet now on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. So visit FanDuel.com/Boston and kick off the NFL season with an offer you don't want to miss. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
Once again, shout out to our good friends and sponsors over at FanDuel. All right, so let's get into the next question here. This is from Joe D. J. Donnelly 0611, who asks, what have you seen from Morgan Geekie in the first 2 games? I didn't know much about him coming in, but I like what he's brought on the bottom 6. Thanks for the question, Joe. And again, I agree with you. I was a big Morgan Geekie fan after the Bruins signed him. I'm one of the leading members of the Geek Squad, as I told Evan, and that this is a guy that last year, didn't even average over 11 minutes of ice time with the Kraken and still had over 30 points. Like, this is a guy that you can look at his production last year under limited minutes and view how he could be in Boston where, I don't think he's getting 18 minutes a night or anything like that. But even if it's 13, 14 minutes, you like what he could bring in more of a featured role there and being a potential 40-point guy. And I think Jim Montgomery kind of echoed what you said, Joe, in that he's liked what he's brought so far in that bottom six spot. He opened the year with Frederick and Matt Poitras, and again, he's a guy that may not be the biggest, most imposing guy, but he's 6'3". He's a really good skater and really effective on the forecheck and does some of the dirty plays. I think even in the preseason, he had that play where he kind of took a hit, made a solid outlet pass, and leads to an empty net goal. Like, does I think those little things really well, but with more room to grow offensively, which I think can be just a byproduct of just more reps, which I think the Bruins are hoping for. And I think it's a good sign for him that the Bruins and Montgomery want to put him into a top six spot with Marchand and Poitras and see how they exactly gel there. And I don't know if Poitras is like the best possible option for a top six wing spot. I feel like that's kind of the one looming question is like, you probably need one more top six winger, I guess, if you really wanted to field a complete forward core, especially if that JVR Coyle Frederick line holds its own in the bottom six. But Geekie, for what he brings in terms of his motor, his shot, which is really good, his ability to kind of contribute on the forecheck and capitalize on the rush. He's a guy that I think the Bruins think has a lot more room to grow. And if, all eyes are going to be focused on Poitras and how he does in this top six spot and whether he can drive play with Marchand. But if playing with Marchand also gets Geekie rolling, and all of a sudden you have a guy that, again, I'm not expecting him just because he's averaging 15 minutes a night to go from a 30-point guy to a 60-point guy. You already had one of those situations with Zacha last year. I don't know if that's going to happen 2 years in a row, but you look at how many forwards that, a guy like Marchand has elevated over the years, whether it's Nugent Heinen or Riley Nash or what have you. And again, he's also usually just had a Bergeron or a Pastrnak with him. So Marchand can't do it all by himself, but I think the Bruins really like what Geekie has, and they think that he could really thrive with added minutes out there. So far, so good. Again, I'm high on him, but until we see it over an extended sample size, like let's see what he does during this 4-game road trip, then we'll be able to, I think, get a better picture of where he's best utilized. But he's a guy that can play center, has pretty good faceoff numbers, can go play on the wing. Like even if Poitras doesn't pan out and he, drops off a cliff, like he can still be your 3C if it calls for that as well. So he's a guy that I think wherever he slots into the lineup, he's really going to be heavily utilized in Jim Montgomery's system. So definitely a guy worth keeping tabs on. Next one is from Ryan J7800, who asks, if Edmonton is desperate, who of Swayman or Ullmark would you trade? What would you want in return? It's a good question, Ryan. Thanks for sending that along. Yeah, that's a fascinating one because if there's one thing Edmonton desperately needs, it's goaltending. They got pretty much everything else, even if their defense is, got a few key pieces there, but not really the best six-man unit. Doesn't really mean all that much when you've got Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl driving play. So, the Bruins would make probably plenty of sense for Edmonton if they wanted to trade and acquire someone. I would imagine if the Bruins were looking at moving someone, it probably would be Ullmark, just in terms of his value is probably higher in terms of right now. He's older, and you also probably could he's probably a more tradable asset in terms of his contract, where let's say if you're the Bruins, I have to imagine if you're trying to acquire someone and you're moving a reigning Vezina Trophy winner, looking for an impact forward coming back. So is Ryan Nugent-Hopkins an option, right? I mean, this guy that had 100 points last year. Again, helps when you're on a power play with guys like McDavid, but Nugent-Hopkins is a really effective guy on the power play, could really energize an already pretty effective power play for the Bruins, and a solid 5-on-5 guy. Like, again, first overall pick. You can talk about how much of his stats are being influenced by playing with guys like McDavid and Draisaitl, but Nugent-Hopkins is still a very good player. Signed long-term to, I think, a pretty fair contract, $5.125 million. So an Ullmark for a Nugent-Hopkins trade, if you're the Bruins, probably makes sense if you're especially looking at just the cap situation. Now, would both teams do it, right? Like, I'm sure Edmonton would probably, bite the bullet and make that trade if it brings in a proven Vezina Trophy winning goalie like Linus Ullmark. Would the Bruins do it? I know that's where it gets kind of, gets a little bit tougher, right? Like, you look at the center spot, and the center position is the one thing I think it's holding up the Bruins from really establishing themselves as being a established contender for years to come, right? Like, they've got a great goalie core, as we all know, great defense. got a lot of talent on the wings, but the play down the middle is kind of the biggest question mark right now. And so if you think that, Zacha and Poitras are your 1-2 punch for the foreseeable future, or you can solve that problem in free agency by getting a guy like Elias Lindholm, then I think that could be a situation where you opt not to trade, one of your key pieces. Because let's face it, Linus Ullmark is a valuable asset out there. He's a guy that could get you a pretty solid return, especially if you wait it out, get to the middle of the season when teams are getting desperate. A team like the Oilers that are in a win now spot are like, we will give up a whole bunch just to get a guy to put our team over the top. It's very appealing to listen to offers to a guy like Ullmark, who, again, also can veto some of his trade spots. So I don't know if he really wants to go to Edmonton, but I digress. But this is still a guy that, if you're the Bruins, if you're going far this year, if you're trying to stay in a lot of games and accrue points at a steady clip, you're going to have to rely a whole lot on Linus Ullmark and Jeremy Swayman as being kind of the key foundation of your success, right? Like, those two guys are going back and forth. When one guy has a cold spell, the other guy gets on a roll. Like, those are your two best avenues towards probably contention this year. So you really have to decide whether or not you think Swayman can handle an established number one spot there, and think that a guy like Brendan Bussey can step into that role. But it's tough. That is a very, very tough call, I think, if you're the Bruins, because you have to decide, is Ryan Nugent-Hopkins the guy that you're willing to kind of break up your established talent in order to do it. So makes it very fascinating, but I could see that being, if the Bruins were ever to, look at a situation where a guy like Ullmark is expendable, a team like Edmonton definitely does make a whole lot of sense out there. All right. So next one we got is from Sean Rajat, who asks, what do you think ends up happening with Heinen, and where does he fit on this team? Great question, Sean. As of right now, Danton is still just chilling. He's still at practice, not signed to any contract. I don't think you're going to get a whole lot of clarity there until the Bruins find out what they're going to do with Matt Poitras. And I think that's going to be a spot where, if Poitras stays and he's going to be there long-term the entire season, I think you could see a situation play out where Heinen signs a league minimum deal, and he's kind of your 13th forward. And I think he brings a lot of value there. He's probably fighting for that spot with Patrick Brown, who's currently on the roster in that similar spot. So I could see that being a spot for Heinen if he wants to be the spare forward after Poitras finds out where exactly he's going. If Poitras doesn't make the team and gets sent back down to the OHL, I could see him, again, Heinen, signing a league minimum deal and joining the Bruins in what could be a featured spot. Like, if your third line is all of a sudden Heinen, Geekie, Frederick, again, it's not the line that I think is as flashy as the one we have right now, or as maybe exciting as what would happen if Poitras stuck around long term. But I think he's still a guy, Heinen, that can bring value with, one, the fact that he's probably going to make dirt cheap money, versatility, familiarity with the Bruins and Jim Montgomery. Like, whether he's a spare forward or a guy that can slot in on the third line, I think Heinen can bring a lot of value to this team. And it's just, I think, going to depend on when exactly he signs that contract. And I think you're probably going to get more of that clarity after Poitras' 9-game sample size is up, and see kind of what comes of it from there. So I think that's kind of the situation for Heinen. Kind of a weird situation for all guys involved, a little bit similar to Anton Strawman last year, where he wasn't really signed but was still hanging around. It seems like Heinen is, heard from the team, bought in, and knows that, a situation is going to present itself once they figure out how some of these other dominoes are going to fall first. So I think that's kind of all the questions we have for today. Again, it's tough to really kind of glean too much out of this Bruins roster off of 2 games that I think we've already talked quite a bit about, but I'm sure there'll be plenty more to discuss once we get into these West Coast games, into this road trip, and see how especially that revamped Bruins lineup works on those games. So again, want to thank you guys for listening in. Thank you for everyone who sent in those questions for us. We'll do plenty more of those throughout the year, even when we have Evan or Ty or anyone else like that on board as well. We'll probably do a few mailbags as we start to ramp up the amount of shows we do each and every season. So again, want to thank you guys for listening in. I'm Conor Ryan. This is Poke the Bear. You guys have a great rest of your day.